What's next for IT? In today's economy, technology touches every aspect of the day-to-day operations of business. There has never been more pressure on IT to deliver for our organizations. So what can we expect over the next decade? We need to think differently about how we approach our work to continue to thrive into the future. This requires all of us to be intentional in how we look at our role going forward. Smart IT is an approach to getting the important things done by transforming the way we think, work, and lead. And now, let's disrupt the status quo, simplify the complex, and reduce risk the smart IT way. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Smart IT Podcast. And today, I'll be chatting with Ashley on all things design, UX, and the experience of the end user. Hey, welcome to the show, Ashley.
Hey, William, thank you.
Well, cool. So cool background story how we met. We both just completed the Facilitation certification program. So congratulations for going through that journey.
Yeah, thanks. And you too. That was a lot of fun. Yeah, that was a good thing.
So right before we started recording, we were talking about the printing our portfolio out. So kind of the output of this whole certification program was a portfolio showing artifacts of our ability to do facilitation. So we were just joking about the size of it and getting it printed out and putting it on a wall at home. So I think you said you might pass on that, but I'm still think I'm going to go with something. I'm going to cover my entire office wall just to showcase it.
Yeah, they were very detailed. I'm not quite sure I want to print that and cover my entire wall with it, but I love the idea of framing it and just looking at it. I feel very proud of the work that we did too. And getting all those artifacts together. Essentially, we were asked to put a portfolio together of like 4 to 6 different workshops, different artifacts that demonstrate our skills, and that really challenged us as facilitators. So, starting with the problem and the group and what kind of setting we were working in, and then talking about how we were going to get through that and using the different skills that we had learned in the course, and getting the output that essentially would work for the group. So it was good. It was a lot of work.
It was. I think we talked about it, and even our instructor Eric talked about it a lot. Is like facilitation being kind of a leadership skill. So I think a lot of people don't think about it necessarily as that, but the ability to hold space for everybody in your team, to solicit all that feedback, make sure everybody included, are some pretty powerful skills to have as any leader, right? So I think we talk about the Smart IT framework and model. That's one of the key aspects of building up those skill sets, and leadership is a huge one there. And as I've learned more and more about facilitation, I'm learning how critical those particular skill sets come in handy in the day-to-day work I do. So how about you?
Yeah, no, I'm thinking about one of the books that I read while we were in the course. Actually, I have it here. It's called Standing in the Fire by Larry Dressler. And he essentially starts out with this story of a group of firefighters trying to battle a raging wildfire that's going down the mountain at 30 miles an hour. And essentially his team, so he's the leader, his team cannot outrun this fire. And so in this moment, he has to take a pause for himself as the leader to evaluate the situation, that the fire is racing down the mountain 30 miles an hour. His team, they're trying to outrun it. They can't. And he's panicked. And I think just being able to take that moment to recognize the feelings that he's having, the fear that he's experiencing as the leader for himself and his own life, but for his team. And just in the quick decision, it's like, I need to get into action mode. I need to figure out how to save my life, how to save the life of my teams. It's kind of a dramatic story, but he does the lights, and I'm not a firefighter, so I don't know how he was able to do this, but essentially lighting a circle on fire, waiting for it to burn, and then he stood inside it as the fire went by him. And, he called out to his team to try to have them come and join him. I'm trying to remember the details, but I think some of them may have, some of them didn't. Um, and, you know, to me, that's really the skill of a facilitator, of like a very high level facilitator in terms of leadership, is not only being able to lead a group, right? We think about leadership as I have to be the one to solve this problem. I have to be the one to have the strategy. But so much of it is actually of real leadership is actually just self-awareness. Okay, how am I feeling? Just checking in with myself here. How am I responding to the group dynamics that are here? And then having some self-awareness to see how other people are responding as well. And so, especially as we get into UX, there's a lot of work that we have to do in leadership where we, in my case, I'm the lead designer. I'm not necessarily a leader in terms of managing people, but I am a leader in terms of presenting strategy, in terms of getting buy-in on ideas, in terms of trying to help the business to consider the user's needs, the risk for not meeting those needs, and trying, yeah, to have them come on board and recognizing. I think this facilitation course that we took helped me to recognize within myself that there are so many moments when I feel very scared, when I'm nervous, when I'm deeply insecure about what I'm going to say, or am I going to get the buy-in, or are people listening to me? And, what to do with those feelings when I'm leading a group, when I'm trying to propose a new idea that might challenge the business strategy, right? Because of some learnings that we had to understand our users. And so I think leadership, these facilitation skills can apply to leaders of all types, not just like people who are running companies on a technical leadership level, but also people who are practitioners who are leading in the ideas that they're sharing, in their collaborative efforts, where, when you're collaborating with people, a lot of things come on to the table. Back to Larry Dresser's book, he talks about how when we collaborate with people, that's when all facets of their personalities come to the table. And again, as the facilitator, how do you manage that? How do you manage your own dynamic with that? So those were some high level takeaways that I had when I think about leadership coming out of that course.
Yeah, and because it's really really important, right, to make the note that it's not just a title, right? Leader title, CEO, CIO, someone with a official manager title or VP title, but where the work actually happens, you have a lot of contributors, right? So a contributor could be a leader, right? They could be working in groups of 3 or 5 or 10 or 100. So irregardless of that size of the team or just the day-to-day interaction between teammates, someone has to kind of point the direction of what they're doing, help facilitate the conversation. And that happens every day. So we talk about in smart IT, it's like everybody's a leader, right? Doesn't necessarily have a title, but actually to get the actual work done that the business needs to get done, we have to have leadership across the board in every interaction that we have. So we can't come to the consensus on which direction we should go or how should we attack this problem. It could stymie the efforts on the front lines, and that could have a business impact. So I just love the ability to let more people know that you got facilitative skills out there that they can help improve their leadership skills, that can help their careers, one, right? And two, they can help their teams. And then that all collectively rolls back up to help the business itself. So yeah, so that's a good point about getting those voices out, speaking
Yeah,
out. Yeah.
absolutely. And I think too, the same line of everyone is a leader, no matter if you're an individual contributor or a practitioner or a leader in title. Um, Anytime you get together in a group of people, or collaborate in any kind of way, there definitely is a leadership dynamic that comes into play, which is what you're talking about. And, I think about my career So I've been doing this for over 6 years, and it started as an intern and then worked my way up to a lead designer. And along that path, when I first started, it was really about the skills, right? Like, can I can I interview participants and gather the research insights that are needed? Can I design for people's needs? Am I able to, um, build something that's not only functional but delightful? And, can I work with our engineering team to make sure that it's built correctly? And all of those things I think are a lot of hard skills that are needed in my field. But the the further you get in your career, and I think this goes for really any career, not just my own, any career that involves other people, I should say. When you get into that upper level, it really is about how well you're able to work with other people, how other, and how you can influence the room and be able to get buy-in from people that you need to make the decisions that are going to have a positive impact on your users, but also the business. And make sure that you're taking care of the people that are working with you, right? That people want to follow you, they want to work with you, they appreciate and respect what you have to say. And I've just noticed that the people who do well in my field are usually the people who are able to master that skill set. And so, that's just something that I've obviously been working on myself as I've wanted to do certain things and realize that I'm up against my own limitations, and, been inspired by other leaders who are able to navigate those situations better than I have been able to. And so I think for me, that first step has been awareness, where it's just like, okay, here's how you're showing up, and just
Yeah.
taking a moment of pause for yourself where, okay, this is the dynamic that's going on. Here's how I'm playing into that. And then, yeah, just seeing how other people are experiencing it themselves as well, being able to respond to that appropriately.
Yeah, that awareness is key, and it helps, right? So if you figure out where you are in your career today and trying to figure out what do I need to do differently tomorrow, how I show up, what type of new skill sets do I need to actually learn? And I think that's important, right? Everybody in all aspects of life, obviously in IT as well. If you want to get to a different path that may take 2 or 3 years, you're working on new skills, you're learning new things, trying things out, getting mentorships, but potentially reaching out beyond your own team to figure out how do I get help. I think sometimes people, when it gets just getting started in their careers, think that the people in front of them just magically showed up like that, right? Like, wow, what a great speaker. Wow, they run great meetings. They just naturally know how to do it. But in truth, though, that right, they learned how to be better at designing meetings, running meetings, building teams, inspiring, encouraging their team, great public speaking, right? They do a lot of practice, right? So a lot of those things you can't see, but I think it's important for us to talk about it, right? What are they doing in the background to get better when they interact with their internal colleagues and how they show up for their business? So I always like to, for people to talk about that, right? It took me 3 or 4 years to get there. It just didn't happen by accident, and that's kind of an important thing. If you're intentional in what you're doing, I want to be better, to be heard better, to lead better, to collaborate better. Is there a way I can go out there, learn new skills, right? It's always a lifelong learning. I think we're officially past the spot where we say we left college and we're good to go, right? It's so as long as you're alive, you got every day to go out there and learn something new. So if you're going to do a prompt for ChatGPT and Google it, online courses, right? You should be getting up every day, getting out there, say, what don't I know today? What can I get better at? Let me go and try and learn that. I think it's kind of critical for all of us in our careers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of learning every day can be really exciting. I was just reading a book yesterday, casually on the side, that talked a little bit about how there's a certain type of personality that I identify with as somebody who needs to be constantly challenged. That
Yeah.
when I get bored, that's almost like my kryptonite. And but it's not just any kind of challenge. It's like needs to be a little bit difficult. I need to feel some resistance to it, and just learning that about myself, that I'm like that just in my personality with just about everything I do. I need just like a little bit of challenge. And so I think, yeah, just bringing that kind of curiosity to, okay, who am I? What do I like? And I mean, it reminds me of, even during the pandemic, we had a lot of people that took up these pandemic hobbies. I was no exception to that, but just letting yourself be curious in your career, but also outside of your career. And, you know, I got into quilting, for instance, and realized that I really liked working with my hands. And in the process, I learned that a lot of things I like about quilting follow very similar principles to the principles that I use as a UX practitioner. And so, just using that to continue to refine my skills. How can my hobbies continue to support what I'm learning, and vice versa? It's just this relationship where, even though work is a huge part of me, there's also this other part of me that's like curious about things outside of work. And I often find that when I truly let myself explore things within my career, but also outside of my career, that they blend together, that there's a lot of overlap. And, I just think giving yourself that freedom to be bad at something, to try something new. Speaking about facilitation, it started for me as an intern being curious about this blue book on the shelf that is the design sprint book that so many people in my field have read. But in 2018, it was a newer book, and just really curious about that. And I remember reading about what a facilitator was and seeing that, oh, it's somebody who essentially can move a group from unknowns to knowns, that they're not the ones that need the expertise in the subject, that they can simply bring the right people together and facilitate a group to move through from something that I don't know at all to, oh, now we have consensus, we have knowns that we didn't have before. And that's a specific kind of skill set that I, being new to the field and realizing, and I was working at Rocket Mortgage at the time, that I knew nothing about mortgages. I knew very little, but I needed to rely on the people who did know about that so that I could do my job better. And so, it became a curiosity that ended up being a cornerstone of my career, where I was curious about this thing that I think could help me do my job better. And all of a sudden it's me realizing that that's the superpower that I have. I can lean into that more. And by leaning into that more, really like leveraging my strengths, I'm able to grow my career faster. Not that that really matters, but I just feel like I'm able to have the career that I want, to have the influence that I desire, to be able to do the projects that I think are going to be impactful, and just realizing how critical my curiosity was to getting into that point, and then leaning into those strengths that I learned from being curious. So I think everybody can lean into their strengths a little bit more. We talk so much about overcoming our weaknesses, but there's really a lot to be said about just leaning into the things that we're good at. And it's hard to know what those things are without approaching with curiosity and realizing that when I first started facilitating, I was kind of bad at it, but that was okay. There were a lot of people who were willing to practice with me, who could understand that I was trying something new. And, that also inspires other people to try new things themselves, right?
Yeah, because that's critical, right? So from an organizational standpoint, every time an individual, right, go out, be more curious, learn more, try new things, maybe express maybe their weaknesses with somebody, and then make that a strength in the future. You start to add it up across the organization and across teams. You start to get organizational muscle, which now getting organizational capabilities that maybe they didn't have before, right? And I guess that's really contrast that with the old style thinking of command and control. Management's going to get together, small room, going to tell you what to do and purse out. So for people like you who are very curious and need to be challenged, they can get like instructions, say, Ashley, just do these 5 things and then do these 10 things and do these 20 things. And that's all you need to do. And it'd be like, that can stifle you, right? It's like, why are you doing it? why are you so prescriptive? And it could be reasons for it, but a lot of times those reasons might not be obvious. And then sometimes it was just the way somebody created it in the back room. So that doesn't really allow you to be creative on the front line necessarily. And if you're stifled and not bring your full self to the job, right, you may not be as innovative. And what is every organization talking about today? Innovation, right? So how are your
Oh
people
yeah.
going to do that if they're waiting on a 1% at the top of the organization to wait for them to say this is dictated, and if they assume that they have to have the answer, that can really really slow things down. So that is very important. What you're mentioning there, um, being curious. What are things you're doing in your personal life that might be able to translate to something in the job? Sharing that with your teammates and just observing the team itself, come together. And then all of a sudden you guys are doing something that nobody thought you could do. It's like, what happened? Like it wasn't something that was pushed down from the top. It was something organically done. As you look at the user needs, market needs, it's like, oh, what can we bring to the market to meet those needs?
Oh yeah. I think, um, I'm thinking about my work experience, right? And thinking about the organizations I've worked for, the teams that I've worked for, where it has been run in more of that traditional way, where you have a leader who has a manager underneath them, who has a manager underneath them, and they want things to go through this traditional chain of command. And for somebody like myself, I'm I'm like a toddler. Like I'm going to ask you why so many times it's going to make you sick. I want to know why. And then I'll also push back on you, right? Like I have a personality where I'm I'm going to ask you to essentially make an argument to me, and then I'm going to try to find the holes in it. And that can be very strange for some leaders. And so I think, for people who are curious like myself, I think what you can do to not combat that, but to work within that, um, is to really think about your team, think about your peers, and you can have a positive influence on that by leaning into those curious tendencies that you have. And it does build momentum in an organization. And especially when you do have that good team culture where people are going out and they're learning things on their own, or they're inspired by something that you said, which leads them to go down their own rabbit hole. And you create space on the team for these things to arise, where it's like, hey, we're not just here to work together, we're here to inspire each other. That inspiration can help create a culture of sharing, of openness, and fight cultures of fear, right? Where we're scared to open our mouths, we're scared to share our ideas. And, when people evaluate the success of a team or the success of an individual and the impact that they have on the bottom line of the company,
Yeah.
I think by and far they find that the teams that operate with that openness with each other, where they're able to lean into their strengths and support each other's weaknesses because there's been openness, because there's been curiosity, there's been this, oh, hey, if we win, it's because we win together. And if we fail, it's not really a failure. It's just an experiment that we all tried together. It's not any one person, it's a collective force of sorts, and a collective support that we have. I think that that can positively influence the cultures that are more traditional, especially as you continue to influence and continue to radiate that curiosity, right? Um, that need to learn, that quest to figure out why. And yeah, just that's like the cornerstone of innovation, where you can't really innovate if you're not you can't innovate if you're in a culture of fear where people are scared to speak up, but you can innovate where people feel like they're excited about the ideas that they're having, wherever those ideas are coming from, right? And so I think that that's the importance that curiosity, just tying it back to the things that you do outside of work, just creating a space for people to share these things that they're learning can be so important. So obviously I'm a huge advocate of learning in the job. Big advocate of organizations that prioritize that. And, even if your organization doesn't, I think not being afraid to be the one that essentially speaks up and says, why should we do this? Or, oh, I learned this thing. I want to try it. Who wants to try it with me? Can
Yeah.
can be positive forces of change.
Yeah, and it's really, you can see it in the innovative companies over the last decade or two. You start to think about new ideas have come out that's been accepted by the masses, and people think it was just a foregone conclusion. When you stop and think about some of these things, it's like those ideas were crazy. No one would buy it. Why would the business provide it? Just stick to what you know, right? People want to get up, get in the car, drive to a blockbuster. They want to scroll through the shelves, get their movies, check it out, take it home, and put it in their DVD player, right? That's the way it works, right? What do you mean we might have a different way? So imagine the folks thinking we have a working business model, people do it, there's no need to change. Right now, obviously, Blockbuster and Netflix are kind of a very popular business case studies. Like, whoa, Blockbuster had the potential to actually acquire them, and imagine what their path would have been if maybe those innovative ideas and curious voices said, "Hell, maybe it's a different way of people consuming content. Let's think about that." And of course,
Yeah.
people always still think about Uber, right? Who would have think I would have a stranger delivering food to my door? Those are not traditional ideals, right? And just think about it, it's like the first person who raised their hand and say, "Hey, let's build a mobile app. Let's do the payment system on the back end, and then get all these restaurants to agree to actually have their food." Or they say, "That's crazy. That's silly, right? Why are you guys thinking about it? Just follow my checklist." People will come to our restaurants. People will come to our store for the movies. Uh, they would think it sounds crazy, but now when you consume it today, it's like, oh yeah, it's natural, right? But it wasn't natural when the person came up with the idea. So as companies,
You know,
yeah, go ahead.
just uh I've worked for companies with 25,000 people and I've worked for companies with 15 and various companies in between. And I think what I've sort of taken as the difference between the two of the Blockbuster and the Netflix, right? Is the example that we're using is the larger companies, the mindset is typically that we have everything to lose. Like we have so much already, but if we do something that might harm the business, we have so much that we could lose. And I see this all the time as I design features where there's a lot of fear where, oh, if we make this change, we could lose business. So we're only going to make changes that are going to contribute to our financial bottom line. And on the other hand, I see these small companies that have everything to gain. It's this mentality of I have nothing right now and I have everything to gain. And I see this when I'm user testing, where in larger companies you're testing for risk. What do we have to lose? And if we implement this, what is the risk, right? If we lose this and get it wrong, right? And in smaller companies, it's a little bit different. It's okay, we're testing for what is the risk if we don't do this?
Yes.
And it is a little bit of a mentality shift where one has an idea that they're starting out with. And for larger organizations, obviously they do a lot to try to implement this mentality of, oh, well, what do we have to gain? And, you know, the reality is that oftentimes those ideas, they do get um they they get taken out of the project, right? They're like, oh, that's too much work, so we're gonna remove this one feature, but we'll go forward with like 20% of the idea, but 80% of the idea is off the table. But that 80% was actually solving that core user need, even if it was going to take longer. And there are ways to have iterative approaches to those things, but I think if you are a large organization, if you are a leader in those organizations, just being aware of how you're seeing those ideas, right? Of like, oh yeah, you might be scared to bring this idea because it might go against the business strategy that you have set out for the next 18 months.
Yeah.
But that idea might be worth exploring, right? You might just take like 5% of your resources to explore that idea. And versus a startup, right? That's going to lean 100% into those ideas. So there you have it. The Netflix
I,
and the Blockbuster,
I
right?
know. Well, a lot of businesses kind of combat that now, right? They observe the startups, see how they do, let them do the crazy idea, let them experiment with this new interface, new experience, new way of consuming it. And if it works, they say, "Oh wow, we'll go acquire them then," right? So sometimes they use something like an external incubation, um, but sometimes that may be you may still be stifling your internal people too much. So it's kind of a balance, right? You need some internal incubation, exploration, that 5 to 10% experimenting, and then maybe if we find the upstart, maybe we'll acquire them. So it's like a
Right.
lot of options on the plate for the executive suite to figure out what they're going to do. Now, one thing that executives really need is a lot of the work that you do, right, around UX, right? So that's looking at the external customer, right, like the experience itself, and that can make and break a product or a service, right? It's if you got the wrong user experience, it could be frustrating for prospects or somebody signing up for the service and trying it out and say, you know what, I'm going over there. So let's start to talk about UX and then the whole concept of design. How are we listening to what potential customers might be willing to spend money on?
Yeah. I mean, I have obviously so many thoughts. This is my career. But what I've noticed is organizations that have a low design maturity, their products, what they put out in the world tends to essentially just replicate exactly what their internal structures are, right? If they've structured things internally, or if they've named things, or if they've set teams in certain ways, those always project out into the product because the silos that you have internally will be felt by the user externally. And the benefit of bringing in good UX people to your organization is that they're the ones who, more than anyone, their whole job is to see it from an outsider looking in. And so, from end to end, they're able to look at the entire system and say, okay, cool. There are all these silos in the experience. Here's where we recommend our focus should be to break those down. So that way the user doesn't know that like, oh, X team worked on this and that's why it's different from this Y product. I'm trying to think of um there are different tools. I'm specifically thinking about my 401k. That's the first one that comes
Yeah,
to my mind where I log in and then I'm forced to choose, oh, well, which portal do I want to go to?
yeah,
There's one for advisors. There's one for employers. There's ones for people who have actually retired. They give you so many choices and you as a user are like, shouldn't you know that? Why should I have to figure out where I should go? That's very confusing for me to know. I mean, I have one login. Why do I have to find in the sea of logins which one I should use to log in to get to where I'm going? And things like that don't happen as much when you do have a UX person that's saying, hey, this is confusing the user. Here is what we're losing, right? Somebody could decide that that's just too much friction for them and they could move their money elsewhere, which is exactly what I recently did, right? I moved my money out of that because I found the experience to be just very messy and not meeting my needs. And so, that's why I think I spend so much of my time getting buy-in is because I can see the risk that an organization has not making those changes because I'm interviewing their users, right? I'm talking to them all the time. And then I'm designing things that they're going to eventually use. And I'm still interviewing them. I'm still doing research. Hey, what do you think about this? And making tweaks and changes to those things and recognizing that that's going to impact the company's bottom line, right? If this is like such an oversight for them, then we're not really going to be able to move the needle forward. So I think good UX people yeah, they see things from the outside, but they are also able to see different systems and patterns. Um, and they look for efficiency. They want to optimize everything. But what I think that we don't always have the expertise in is we don't know the domain expertise, and also we're not the only ones with good ideas. I'm there's like a lyric that comes to mind in a song that I listened to recently. It's like, what is it? It can be a fair idea if you make it their idea.
Yeah.
And coming back to facilitation again, it's really about, hey, sometimes we have engineers or people in IT or, even stakeholders or salespeople. They have these great ideas for how to improve the user experience. I think it's on everyone's mind now that they want it to be good. There's an expectation for what good user experience is, and everyone's sort of rating their products themselves and their people are optimizers, right? They want to contribute, they want to show up with their idea, they want to know that they're having a positive impact on the company that they're working for. And, also coming back to good UX people, it's like the idea doesn't have to come from me. I want to tap into the entire organization and I want to be able to say, oh, yeah, that's awesome. Let's take that. Let's iterate on it. I can make some changes. I'll make a prototype, show it to you. We can test it with the user. We'll get feedback. And I find that often that's the best way to get buy-in is you have people that are involved in the process of of creating the ideas, of developing those ideas, and then they're excited for when they
Yeah.
release, right? And it just creates this positive momentum in the organization where you have people that are starting to look for opportunities because they know they will be heard by the people who can make those changes. So
Yes, I know it's a couple of big ideals there, right? That first one is being able to visualize the end-to-end user experience. So most individual contributors on different teams don't necessarily see that. So we go back to the example of logging into the 401k or even the healthcare portal, right? So I got that problem. It's the exact same issue you said. When I log into my healthcare provider, they ask me all these questions about where you want to go. And then they make it extremely hard on the website for like a number to talk to a human. And then how they have a little chat bot on the side is kind of kludgy. Uh, and then some of those things, the kludginess could be an indication of like technical debt on the back end, things that IT haven't got to because they can't get the money to like upgrade a system. It can be maybe the IVR system for the call center maybe need to be updated. Maybe there's some legal or privacy issues in the background. So it could be multiple like dependencies of this experience that need upgrading or improvements, but all require money. And no one knows what the user experience looks like, they can't even get to the point where they say, okay, we can improve the experience here, here, and here. So if you don't see what the dependencies are, which group has it, which domain has it, and what the options are, it can just overwhelm an organization and say, this is the best we can do. We know the experience is clunky, kludgy, and then maybe we'll just redesign the website aesthetically. And it's like, well, that wasn't the problem. Like you have 5 potential problems, which can have potentially 20 sub-projects or initiatives that need to happen because you need to upgrade some systems, upgrade some interfaces, maybe have a better integration with some third parties for all this underlying tech to actually make it work. So I love the fact that UX let's start off with that end-to-end journey to kind of be the starting point. Can we start the other way around where you start talking about data centers and cloud and code? It can be overwhelming. An individual team could be like, I'm developing this code this way because my developers know these skill sets. Somebody over here could be, this is the way we're doing it because here our IVR system, this is the way the IVR technology works. So this is how we do this way. So I think it's pretty powerful when the UX experience can come in and say, oh, what's the implication of that system having these limitations? Let's start to investigate that. Let's look at this holistically. So at the end of the day, we don't have you shifting from one company to the next. So you could expose a very, very large problem and it can overwhelm the C-suite like, oh my God, I just thought there was going to be like a $50,000 fix, a little update here and there. And it's like, oh, you guys are identifying multiple systems on the back end, multiple ways my customer support people are trained and how they deal with customers. So it's kind of I kind of really love when I started looking more what UX was doing with design thinking, with things like, oh, this is making more and more sense now, and how critical it is to actually listen and hear what the customer is saying, and actually being prepped to actually uh, generate an actual actionable plan. What the cost are, is it the 18-month initiative, the 2 years, is it something else? Maybe you should just acquire another company that has the underlying tech already, and then that makes it maybe a 6-month project, right? So a lot of options that are going on there. So let's talk about UX and just kind of putting all these pieces together so we can kind of visualize
Oh,
it for
yeah.
because so we can back into what do we need to do from the organization to make these changes.
Oh, so many thoughts. Yeah, you said so many good things in there. I'm thinking first of a workshop that I led recently with an engineering group in Turkey. And, the product team is here in the United States. This engineering team is in Turkey. And really the goal was how can we help this engineering team to learn more about the customer and their needs so that when they're building things, they have some awareness of how it's going to impact the user. And I think one of the best things that I've seen in terms of impact that you can have on the organization is a lot of organizations are they record their sessions. So session recordings, they can go in and users are anonymized, but you can still watch how they interact with your product and literally assigning different teams to watch those videos together and talk about what they're seeing. And just setting a little bit of time aside every week to say we're going to do a session recording and just pick one. And that gets everyone sort of thinking about, oh, how is this thing that I'm doing impacting the user? And you can make it relevant. Like if you're doing something with cloud, use something that uses the cloud, right? On the user side. So they see how this eventually makes it towards the user. And that can be a simple way to just have a little bit of a mindset change for people where they're able to say, oh, yeah, this is how they're seeing it. This is how they're using it. I don't think that everyone can sit and interview customers all day. And so it really is like, how do you bring the customers, the users to the employees in the organization? One of those ways is sharing out session recordings. Another is making sure that your team who is talking to customers, whether it's your sales team or your customer representatives or your user research team or your product team, your product people, having them share out clips from those or other things can be really valuable. Another thing that I think of, though, that makes, and it's not exclusive to UX people, but UX is always doing this where, we're given a problem saying, okay, solve this one problem. And what we do is we look at the bookends of the problem. Okay, what's happening before this and what's happening after this? And when we think about designing for systems, it's not just solving the specific problem, right? Like even if you're doing work on cloud infrastructure, the engineer is always thinking about, okay, what comes before and what comes after, right? And so I think just using that same mentality to say, okay, what is happening before this and what is happening after this? And then the other thing that I'm thinking about, and a lot of these are just mentality shifts, but I've talked to some people recently who, yeah, they're designing their own websites, or they're working on their own personal projects, and they have all this information that they want everyone to know. Like, oh, I have all this stuff I want to share with everyone, but they have to really look at it from the other end of, well, what do people want to know from you, right? And what is the right amount of information for them to take in? Is it a wall of text on a website, or is it just like snippets of what you can provide, right? Headlines. And then if they want to know more, they can read the little paragraph, but there's like, you've broken up the text in a way that's a little bit more digestible for the person who's receiving it. And I think that mindset actually comes into play even when we interact with other people, which is like, we have so much we want to share with you. But on the other end, what is appropriate for this person to be receiving? What do they want? What do they want to get out of what you're doing? And maybe just tailoring it for the receiver and having that mentality of what do they need to get the job done that they have to do. What do they need from you to do the job that they have to do? And just giving that to them, just being efficient, right? And in terms of a product, it's like I see, yeah, healthcare portals that are like, oh, we're going to solve this problem by putting in another chatbot. Or we're going to solve this problem by like, oh, we see people or there are a lot of people who call us because they can't find their a specific document or their follow, or yeah, you go to a doctor, you get a follow-up document. They can't find this document, or they need to change their prescription location. And so, sometimes companies receive that information and they're like, we have 10% of all the calls that we get are about how to change our your pharmacy location. So let's just put that on the front page, right? Let's just put that front and center, here's where you change it. And maybe that's not actually the most appropriate way from the user's perspective. From the business, you're like, yeah, that's a great way to solve that problem. Let's just put a banner up. Well, you also have 8% of your calls that are about finding where to pay. And, you have 12% that are calling about something else entirely. And if you have 3 different banners at the top of your screen, or every time that you're oh, all these call centers are receiving information about this one specific problem, let's just put a banner up. And that's not actually solving the fundamental problem, right? And so, I think, again, pulling it back to the fact that UX people do look at it from the outside perspective, sometimes showing is better than telling. That's where a lot of the session recordings can come into play, where you're watching users that are just confused. You're also watching the metrics and you're like, hey, we need to make changes. And then I think, yeah, to your point, it can be really overwhelming where you're like, there's so much that has to be changed. You think about buying an old house, right? You have the inspection and you're like, everything has to go. The foundation needs to be replaced, the roof, the bathrooms. And I don't even like the wallpaper that's on the wall, but I have to live in this room. Do I change the wallpaper first, or do I do the foundation and the roof? And I think most people are familiar with those dilemmas of, I only have so much money, but there's so much that needs to be done. And, really bringing in your product managers, your UX people, if you have them, to say, okay, how do we prioritize these changes? We see that people can't find where to go to update their pharmacy location. So, that's a problem. We need to fix it. 10% of our call volume is about this specific thing. And, then working together to find a real solution. And maybe there's a long-term plan for that, right? Maybe we can't change the whole architecture of the website to support this immediately, but is there an incremental way to get to that point? And, working together to figure that out, I think is the foundation of what product even is, right? Here's our limitations. UX people, we have a laundry list miles long of things that we want to do. We could make it perfect. We could just make this easy for all of us. Let's just do it. But it comes up against reality, which is we only have so many resources. And that's where a good product manager, good product team, or whoever's in charge of your priority, maybe you own it together collectively as a team, but you're considering in that equation the impact that it's having on your users, right? So really being user first and saying, okay, what is the greatest pain point? And then how do we fix this in a way that's incremental, that eventually leads to a reduction in confusion, which might be a banner ad on your page for 2 weeks until you launch something that's a little bit more functional, that's been tested and researched, up to your teams. But or maybe you just acquire a company that does that differently. Then you end up with some kind of Frankenstein situation oftentimes. And it still needs a roadmap for how this product is going to be embedded within the product. But yeah, I would say those are good things to consider.
Yeah, yeah, quite a few things, right? Prioritization, project management of very long processes, a lot of moving parts, pricing out level of efforts. I mean, that's a lot of things, right? To bring it back up into the decision making process to say, let's work on these three things. And then say, how long will it take? How much it costs? We're not exactly sure. We need to go research it. We have nobody to go research it. Okay, well, put that on the backlog. And then 4 weeks later, no one can get to the looking at doing an analysis, find out how much it might cost. And then it also brings up the whole thing with feedback, right? So will the banner help or not help? Like you kept mentioning about the percentage of the calls being about 8% on this issue versus 10%. So you got to keep bringing that feedback back in, right? So now this kind of points out the need for teams to work very closely together, keeping each other up to date. So if you guys change something, you know what the back end looking like, and then vice versa. So once again, it kind of leads back to what leadership in all different levels, right? Great communications, making sure everybody's voices are being heard. And it got to be happening at scale and at speed, right? We can't be taking 2 weeks to find out that thing we just implemented didn't work. I thought we were done because that team moved on to another thing from the backlog. They thought they were done. They thought the fix was in. And then you find out 4 months later, now it made it worse. Well, you guys can tell us.
I've worked with teams where, the engineers come to me and they're like, I'm so frustrated. I continue, like, why do I have to keep working on this specific piece of code over and over and over again? And the answer is because we are iterating, right? We're like doing a little bit, getting feedback, and then we'll go back and do a little bit more, get more feedback, and add a little bit more. And I do have engineers that are like, I'm sick of this code base. Like, can you move me to something, like, give me more variety? The reality is we have to keep going back. We'll do a little bit and keep getting that feedback to make sure that we're solving this problem right. And yeah, I mean, it does mean that you have to code in the same coding environment over and over again.
At least we can
But
show the
helping them to
roadmap.
yeah, helping them to see the long-term plan, I think, can help people when, they might be frustrated by working in that same code base over and over again. So
just let them know, we understand your frustration.
yes.
This is why we're doing it. We have a roadmap to get off the code base. Here's the timeline. And then in the meantime, your iteration is helping out the frontline customer. And I understand that's the culture you guys have. We're all in it together. And then the frustrations all across the board, but we're just trying to match what the consumer needs from us at this time. Because like you said, there's constraints and time, money, and resources.
Yeah, but the more you can bring the user to the people who are at the company working on these problems, however deep they're working on those problems, I think that it can really help people realize, oh yeah, it's okay if I work in the same code base over and over again, because I'm seeing the improvement that we're having and I'm excited about that. So yeah, it's just yeah, getting people that information.
And the next iteration is what is going to have Ashley come back to that other company because that little feature was finally corrected enough to make the experience better. And she said, you know what? It's good enough. I'm going back.
Right? Yeah, you would hope.
Man, so we're just like scratching the surface here, right? Because I think we talked about some leadership. We've talked about facilitation, upleveling the skill sets, leading where you are. And we're just trying to kind of touch the surface on UX on the front end and then the back end infrastructure. So we'll definitely have to do another session here.
Yeah, that would be great.
So I think this is a good place to pause here on this particular session. And then we'll be back in the future with Ashley to talk more user experience, design thinking, systems thinking, and how we got all these different teams working together. So in the meantime, this has been another episode of the Smart IT Podcast. Until next time, take care. Thanks for joining another episode of the Smart IT Podcast, where we explore what's next for IT and disrupt the status quo, simplify the complex, and reduce risk together. If you like what you hear, please like, subscribe, and leave your comments. And for more Smart IT wisdom, check out my website at williamreed.info.